Hello, and thank you so much for joining us again. We've been talking about the local church, and today we're going to continue on our next lesson talking about discovering my place. Last week we were reading 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and I'm just going to read one verse out of what we read last week. It's verse 18 in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It says, "But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where He wants it." Also in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16, look what it says. "He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love." You look at these two verses, and it's incredible that just how our body is designed, God has given each one of us a place. Now, whether you don't feel like you have a place or whether you haven't found your place yet, doesn't mean you don't have one. If God has brought you into the church that you're a part of, that is your local church, your local body, and that means you have a place there. Now, let's talk about kind of discovering this place. There's a story in Matthew that I want to read. It's Matthew chapter 14. It's a famous story in Matthew where we know Jesus feeds 5,000 men plus women and children. And in this story from verse 13, let's read it. It says, "As soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick." Before we keep reading, look what in verse 13 it says. "He left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns." The first thing about discovering our place is sometimes we're not a part of our local church long enough to discover our place. You know, previously we talked about that honeymoon season when you join a church and it's exciting, you love everyone, everyone's perfect, everyone smiles at you, everyone says nice things about you, and it just seems like you could not find a better place. You start becoming more a part of the church and meeting people and rubbing shoulders with people and butting heads with people more and becoming more a part of the family. Conflict begins to arise. You kind of start seeing things you didn't see before. And now you're kind of going through a harder time. And it's interesting that in verse 13 it says, "He went to a remote area to be alone." And people left their towns and started going on foot to that place. So the first thing I want to say is that you got to stick through it when you're going through a remote area. Because it's normal, and every single one of us has to go through this. When we join a church, we start going through like kind of a desert season, a remote area season, where it's hard. We've left our city where we're used to it, we're comfortable, we have food, we have everything we need, and we start going through something that's more difficult. And this is normal for every single believer when they're becoming more and more part of their local church. Jesus went to a remote area, and the people followed to that remote area. Don't abandon ship and go to the next church when it's getting hard or dry or shaky or quiet or tough. Remote areas are normal. Jesus goes to remote areas, and the people that we hear, which I could say resembles the church, they left their towns to follow him into a remote area. Those areas are normal for us, and they're a part of us discovering our place. If it's all good and then you're leaving because it's all bad to the next place because you need it to be all good again, you have aborted from your remote area, and you're not going to discover your place. You need to get through that remote area, and you're going to see the miracle that happens. They go through this remote area, and they're about to start discovering each their place. Then in 14, it says, "Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. That evening, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves.' But Jesus said, 'That isn't necessary. You feed them.' And then it says in 17, 'But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish,' they answered." The second thing I want to say is that it will cost us something to find our place. Yes, Jesus paid the price. He paid the price for your salvation. He paid the price and the calling you received, what you have inherited from him. But there is a price that you have to pay. And I think I want to maybe touch on giving and maybe sacrificing in your life, because there are things that you're going to have to lay down, things that you're going to have to give up, financially sacrificing and giving, because it's a part of the cost that you're paying to follow. And in paying that cost, you begin to discover more and more what your place is. It's interesting that here, these people were leaving the city, and it cost them something to go this far to this remote area, to be there where Jesus wanted them to be. Someone gave up more than somebody else. Someone gave up 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then we're about to see the miracle of what's about to happen for the rest. So my sacrifice and my giving up my time and my laying things down, it's a part of my commitment to the local church I'm a part of. And in that commitment, I begin to discover more and more my place. And then look what happens when we are ready to give up. When we give up into God's hands, what we give up into God's hands will always multiply. What we give up into God's hands will never leave us picking up less. When I give time to God, I'm not going to be running out of time to do the things that I need to do. When I'm giving God my finances, I'm not going to be bankrupt, or I'm not going to be completely broke. Yeah, sometimes God's going to ask me to give everything, but that's not going to leave me with less. It's actually going to leave me with more. When we give to God, watch what happens. It says, bring them here. The 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish were brought to him. He told the people to sit down. And Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up the 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. What was given to Jesus, and then Jesus blessed and broke, that was what was distributed. So if we're just consumers in our churches, just wanting to receive, just wanting to take, we're called to distribute. And it's interesting, what was given to Jesus, Jesus then blessed it, he broke it, he gave it to the disciples, and they began to distribute. And I want you to imagine this. They're all sitting in groups. The disciples receive from Jesus what he just broke and what he just blessed, and they begin to distribute. And in this distribution, every single person begins to receive. Every single person begins to eat. And I think it's worth mentioning that as a church, when we are discovering our place, we're not just going to consume, we're going to distribute. When we begin to give, because remember, whatever your place is, there's also a gift there that God has given you. There's a calling that you have on your life. You don't just wake up in it. You walk into it. And one of the ways that we walk into it is by giving, by distributing, by serving. If I'm only coming to church to receive, it's going to take me a very, very long time, and if it will ever even come, that I step into my place. When I'm beginning to distribute what God is giving to me, by helping a neighbor, by visiting somebody at their house, by giving somebody a phone call and checking in on them, anything that I'm able to distribute, that God is allowing me to do. I asked one time, man, I'm trying to figure out what my calling is. What do you advise me to do as my next step? And this pastor looked at me and said, right away, I was shocked by how quick he answered. He said, whatever your hands can do, do it. And here, with their hands, they begin to distribute to each other, each one beginning to take his place. And it's crazy, when we are all in our place and we are not just consuming, but we're distributing, every single person in the place that we're at, every single person in the church that we're a part of begins to eat and leave full. The lack is not because your pastor's not doing enough. The lack is because I'm not distributing. The lack is because I'm not playing my role. When I'm in my place, I'm going to distribute, and my distribution is going to bring food, bring health, bring growth to the people that are around me. Every single person there ate and was full, and there was leftovers. That is the fingerprint of God, is that when we are in our place, not just to consume and take, but to give, every single person will receive what they need, and there'll be more left over. And so I just want to encourage you with these last things that we just talked about, that in this miracle, you got to go through that remote area. Don't back out when it gets hard at church. Stay there and stay planted. And then the next thing, be ready to sacrifice. Be ready to give. Don't be afraid of the things that God is asking you for. Give them. You're never going to pick up less. And the last thing is don't just consume, but distribute. Distribute to the people that are around you. And in that, you're going to discover your place. And you're going to see it's so much better to give than to receive. We hope that this blesses you and that you have a great week. Thank you so much.